My name is Celia West. I'm 32. And this morning, they stood and clapped for a $1.69 billion deal that I built under someone else's name. The SynerCore boardroom glowed with glass and chrome. Reporters snapped photos. Executives applauded. Brandon stood at the center like he'd just conquered a mountain. My name? Nowhere. Not in the press kit. Not in the slides. Not in the speeches. They erased me. Cleanly, deliberately, like I'd never existed in the first place. 2 years of work, 15 months of strategy, thousands of hours, gone, buried under a headline with his face on it. And as they cheered for him, I sat there, spine straight, hands folded, and quietly reached for the document they all forgot existed. Clause 7.4, a single line of legal language that could freeze every dollar they just toasted to. This wasn't oversight. This wasn't politics. This was war. If you've ever been erased from something you built, if you've ever watched someone else take credit for work you bled for, stay with me. Because the decision I made next didn't just rewrite the story, it collapsed the stage they were standing on. Drop a comment if you've ever been left out of your own success. And hit subscribe, because what happened after I clicked submit changed everything. The glass walls of the SynerCore boardroom refracted the morning light into sterile beams, slicing through the rows of navy suits and power dresses like spotlights on a stage. I sat at the edge of the U-shaped table, spine straight, hands folded, lips curled into a performance of polite satisfaction. All around me, applause, camera shutters, a perfectly scripted celebration. Brandon stood at the center, the chrome SynerCore logo gleaming behind him like a halo. His tailored suit hugged his frame with corporate precision. We're proud to close this acquisition, our largest to date. It's a reflection of SynerCore's unified leadership, he said smoothly, as though he'd personally negotiated every clause, crunched every valuation model, led every sleepless pivot. As though I hadn't spent the past 15 months architecting this deal from napkin to billion-dollar signature. My name wasn't on the slide. It wasn't on the one-pager the board received. Not in the press kit, not on the screen, not in Brandon's rehearsed remarks. I had been erased. Victor Langston, our CEO, sat like a statue 2 seats down. He didn't look at me. He hadn't, not since yesterday's pre-brief. Perhaps he thought the silence would count as neutrality. Perhaps he didn't realize that silence is what weaponized it all. From across the table, Naomi Chen's gaze met mine for a fraction of a second. She didn't blink. She didn't smile. But her fingers tapped once, deliberately, against the legal pad in front of her. Tap, tap, pause, tap. A signal. I nodded, barely, and slipped one hand beneath the polished mahogany table toward my laptop bag. Brandon was still talking. This is just the beginning of SynerCore's global expansion strategy, he said, his voice measured, modulated, coached. We believe in honoring the work of every team member. The hypocrisy made my throat tighten. I tasted iron. Still, I smiled. Behind him, the massive display screen flashed. $1.69 billion acquisition closed, powered by leadership. Not my leadership. A week ago, Brandon had texted me at 2 a.m. This will be the legacy move. See. You in? We hadn't spoken much since the breakup, but professionally, I'd convinced myself we could still function. That message had been a lie. Legacy, yes, but not mine. You're the brain, he used to say. I'm the face. They need both. Once it felt like partnership. Now it felt like theft. The applause swelled again as the press photographers rotated for side angles. Brandon raised a hand in faux humility, giving a practiced half laugh. I watched him bathe in the credit. Watched them, Victor, the board, even the damn interns, applaud the man who had sliced my name from the credits like trimming fat off steak. I lowered my gaze, pretending to straighten my pen. Instead, I reached into the laptop sleeve and pulled out the matte black external drive. My fingers moved automatically, unlocking it with a fingerprint swipe. The folder I'd buried 2 years ago blinked open on my screen. Clause 7. Point 4, final draft, .pdf, I clicked it, and the preamble filled the screen. Termination of exclusive licensing and asset authority upon breach of attribution. My hand hovered over the trackpad. It didn't shake. This wasn't fury. Not yet. This was calibration. Across the room, Naomi's pen paused mid-word. She didn't look up, but I could feel it. She knew. She remembered. We had drafted Clause 7.4 in a windowless room just in case. Naomi had called it career insurance. I'd called it a just in case. Brandon had never known it existed. Neither had Victor. Only one copy had ever been saved, and I kept it encrypted and buried in silence. Until now. My thumb pressed against the export button. A small send to legal dialogue hovered like a thread over my screen. Not yet. Not today. But soon. Brandon finished his speech. Reporters raised hands. Victor signaled for the next department to present. I returned the drive to my bag, locked the zipper, lifted my chin. This wasn't overlooked, I whispered to myself. This was war. The clause was my insurance policy. I wrote it in a windowless room while pretending Brandon still respected me. The Denver office in 2022 was barely an office, more like a garage with delusions of grandeur. One wall had exposed pipes, the other was a half-painted whiteboard someone swore they'd finish eventually. Most nights we worked with the lights off, lit only by the glow of monitors and microwave leftovers. We called it grit. In hindsight, it was erosion. Brandon thrived in the chaos. His charisma filled the space, sucking oxygen from every corner. He could command attention with a shrug. Back then, I still thought that was charm. I didn't see the vacuum underneath. I had spent the entire spring building the framework for SynerCore's new AI valuation model. It was ugly math. Iterative, recursive, hard to pitch in slides. But it worked. Brandon helped translate it into digestible language for executives. That was the deal. I build, he sells. Until he started tweaking my drafts. One line became two. My name dropped from the byline. It's just for the board copy, he'd say. Simplifies the flow. You know how Victor is. He'd kiss my forehead afterward like it was a favor, like he was protecting me from exposure I hadn't asked to avoid. The first time he said, I'll present it under my name. It's just politics. I believed him. That belief cost me everything. At first, I told myself it didn't matter. Let him say it. Let him wear the suit, shake the hands. I had the code, the models, the ownership. Didn't I? Then came the meetings I wasn't invited to. The strategy sessions with my slides, but not my voice. The press release that named Brandon Hale as the driving visionary behind Project Lodestar. My inbox stayed silent. My name stayed absent. That summer, I started saving everything. Every draft, every version history, every Slack message. Quietly, obsessively, just in case. One Tuesday evening, I stayed behind after Brandon left for a board drinks thing. I was adjusting the documentation protocol, an internal process no one but me ever read. Naomi poked her head in. She was still an intern back then, overqualified and underestimated. I saw the metadata on that deck Brandon submitted, she said softly. It had your name on it 2 versions ago. I blinked. Yeah, he's presenting it on behalf of the team. She didn't argue. She just stepped inside and placed a printed legal template on my desk. One clause had been highlighted in yellow. Clause 7.4, breach of attribution and protective licensing suspension. No explanation. Just a look. I read it 3 times before speaking. This doesn't exist in our current IAP policy. Nope, she said. But it could. That night, I didn't go home. I stayed, writing, drafting, folding the language in carefully so it wouldn't trigger alarms. I cross-referenced state-level protections, internal precedent, the SynerCore partner charter. I embedded 7.4 in the template as a modular clause. Activated only if attribution was violated in a deal involving proprietary frameworks, like the one I'd just built. When it was done, I sent it to legal under the guise of template expansion and walked it to Thompson, our internal counsel. He barely glanced at it. "No red flags," he said, stamping the approval. Naomi co-signed as witness. Thompson was laid off 2 months later. I encrypted the clause file, archived it under my private drive, gave it a label I'd never forget. 3 weeks after that, I heard Brandon in the hallway outside the kitchen, laughing with 2 other execs. I didn't catch the question, but I'll never forget his answer. "She's too technical to lead," he said. "That's why I clean her work up." Something in me crystallized then. Not anger, not even sadness, just a switch, a final click. That night, I returned to my laptop and opened the file again. I didn't revise it. I didn't tweak a word. I simply renamed it. For the day they forget.pdf. Naomi didn't ask why I wanted to meet. She simply brought the envelope I'd never asked for, but she'd always kept. The cafe sat tucked beneath a canopy of silver maples, its windows blurred by the drizzle that had begun just as I left the office. It was the kind of place we used to run to during late audit seasons. Neutral ground, no glass walls or badge scanners, just cheap ceramic mugs and the low hum of anonymity. I was already seated when she arrived, her coat damp at the shoulders, her steps deliberate. She didn't bother with pleasantries. No smile, no hello. Just the soft thud of a large envelope sliding across the table. My fingers closed around it. Thick, weighted. The edges slightly curled from years of being moved but never opened. Her handwriting on the tab. Block letters, deliberate. Clause 7.4, original, stamped, time-coded, pre-scrutiny era. She took the seat across from me and exhaled. Her eyes flicked once to the window, then settled on me. "You sure?" "More than I've ever been." She didn't nod. She simply took out a small folder of her own and laid it beside the tea she hadn't ordered yet. Inside, timeline drafts, compliance process flowcharts, the latest version of the internal disruption protocols. Naomi hadn't just kept the clause. She had kept everything. "I pulled the policy for breach-triggered freezes," she said, unfolding the timeline. "You've got 48 hours from submission to full legal lockdown, assuming the clause stands." "It'll stand." "I know." Her voice was so even it landed like a verdict. "We just need the metadata to prove Brandon edited you out post-submission." My heart beat once, hard, but I didn't flinch. "Greg?" "Yeah." I arched an eyebrow. "He came to me last quarter, said Brandon threatened to cut his access if he flagged another file overwrite. I kept him close since. Told him this day might come." I let out a low breath. I had underestimated Naomi. I always knew she was sharp, but I didn't know she was waiting. Like me. "I asked him to trace the edit history on the project folders," she continued. "He pulled 17 unauthorized revisions across 6 months. All of them erased your authorship fields." "God," I muttered. "It was that many." "Worse. One edit added his name over yours in version history. Not a deletion. A swap." The waitress arrived and dropped off tea we hadn't asked for. "Jasmine. The usual." Naomi had called ahead. I let the cup warm my hands. "We file tonight," she said. "Legal gets the disruption notice by 9 a.m. tomorrow. At that point, the compliance team will freeze project access. If Brandon tries to force it through, he'll trigger the second clause," I finished. "External arbitration. Potential investigation." Naomi gave the faintest trace of a smile. "You've been ready." I didn't answer. I opened the envelope slowly, careful not to rip it, though part of me wanted to tear it open with every ounce of what I'd held back for the last 2 years. The document inside was crisp, unedited. My initials still scrawled in the margins. The old watermark from the 2022 template series still visible on the footer. It was real, still binding, and very much alive. Naomi pulled a notary form from her folder. You sign this, and the activation is real. Internal legal has to acknowledge within 12 hours. Once we submit, there's no recall. I held the pen, stared at the signature line. My fingers didn't tremble. The pen moved. Deliberate. Loop by loop, I wrote my name. Not for them. For myself. She stamped it, dated it, slid it back into the envelope. The cafe had gone quiet. Even the rain softened. I picked up my tea and let the silence settle between us. Naomi watched me with that same unreadable expression she'd always worn in boardrooms. Unimpressed, unafraid, unbothered. We trigger this, Naomi says, and there's no walking it back. I sip my tea. Good. I'm done walking. Clause 7.4 was never a threat. It was a countdown. And they just heard the first tick. The elevator doors parted with a mechanical sigh, revealing the polished silence of SynerCore's legal affairs floor. Everything up here gleamed. Glass doors, brushed steel nameplates, carpet fibers aligned by invisible algorithms. I stepped in with the envelope under one arm, Naomi flanking me on the left, Greg walking 2 steps behind like a shadow that knew too much. Downstairs, day 2 of the celebration was in full swing. I could hear muffled mic checks and the cadence of an over-rehearsed PR team through the atrium glass. Brandon was likely doing a final walkthrough with the press corps, blissfully unaware that his victory speech was about to expire. We moved past reception. The clerk didn't ask for ID. Naomi's badge was enough. Ramirez was already waiting for us in the compliance conference room. His face wore the strained neutrality of someone who knew politics smelled worse than truth. He gestured to the table. Naomi sat first. I followed. Greg stayed near the corner, quietly opening his laptop. I understand you're here to discuss a clause activation, Ramirez said carefully. Naomi didn't smile. She opened the envelope and slid out the document like she was drawing a sword. Clause 7.4. It's been notarized and time-stamped. We're requesting immediate review under Internal Attribution Protocol, Subarticle 3C. He took it with both hands, scanned the header. Where was this clause implemented? Template 12C, Naomi replied. IP protection, dated July 2022, signed by Thompson. You'll find internal legal archived it under revision 3.2. Victor Langston approved that cycle. Ramirez blinked. That's deep archive. Still binding, I said. He nodded, kept reading. What's the basis for invocation? Naomi gestured toward Greg. Greg tapped a key and the conference screen came alive. 17 metadata overwrites, Greg began, voice level. All within Project Lodestar. 6 of them swapped authorship tags from C. West to B. Hale. 11 removed attribution entries entirely. He clicked again. A timeline appeared, color-coded, dated, precise. I watched Ramirez's jaw tighten slightly. Not out of surprise, but resignation. He knew what this meant. I'll need to take this to Langston immediately, he said. We're prepared, Naomi said. We'll join you. 10 minutes later, we were in Victor's office. Still sterile. Still deliberately impersonal, like it was designed for plausible deniability. He stood as we entered, but didn't offer a seat. I take it this isn't a negotiation, he said flatly. No, I replied. Naomi laid the clause and metadata logs on his desk. The clause was embedded in a template you approved. It allows the originator to halt intellectual property usage in the event of attribution breach, which has occurred, repeatedly. He flipped through the pages with the mechanical calm of a man trying not to blink. We're in the middle of a global announcement, he said. You want to pull the brakes now? You let Brandon overwrite my work 17 times, I said. That announcement is built on a false attribution. This isn't sabotage. It's correction. He looked at Naomi. You're sure this holds? You signed off on this clause 2 years ago. Victor exhaled through his nose. This is going to burn. Naomi opened her laptop. Only if you stall. His silence was the same kind I'd learned to decode, calculation laced with cowardice. She opened the internal activation portal. Ramirez entered his override code. Naomi typed in the case ID, number 74-LODESTAR-BREACH. The screen blinked once, then turned red. Freeze notification has been issued to internal legal, the board, and SynerCore's financial partners, she said calmly. All deal activity is suspended until arbitration is completed. I watched the color drain from Victor's face. His phone buzzed almost instantly. He didn't pick it up. Outside, I could hear the muffled hum of cameras still running. Inside, no one moved. I stood slowly, gathered the file, and turned to face him fully. You let them erase me. Now I'm erasing the deal. They spoke to the cameras like everything was intact. But inside, the servers were locking down and the boardroom was catching fire. Downstairs, the lights on the press stage burned hot enough to sting the skin. Brandon stood dead center, smiling like the house wasn't already collapsing behind him. Rows of journalists angled phones and tablets toward him. The SynerCore banner rippled gently behind him, a digital ticker at the bottom announcing, Lodestar Acquisition, live from Chicago HQ. I stood just beyond the barrier rope. Anonymous, technically credentialed, but unimportant in the eyes of the camera. It was exactly how I wanted it. Brandon cleared his throat and launched into his speech, rich with corporate swagger. This acquisition will bring unprecedented innovation to SynerCore's core architecture. We're not just expanding our footprint, we're reshaping the future. My phone buzzed. Naomi's message. Asset freeze confirmed. Server blocks propagated. Compliance timestamp logged. Seconds later, another alert. This time from the press Slack channel I still had back-end access to. Leak flagged. Scheduled for 12:17. T-minus 5 minutes. Inside the building, Victor Langston was reportedly in a closed-door meeting with compliance and 3 senior legal officers. Greg had deployed the internal logs to the audit chain. Ramirez signed the receipts. Every file had been marked with Clause 7.4, invoked, attribution breach. Brandon didn't know. Not yet. I want to acknowledge the extraordinary effort of the entire leadership team, especially our operations division, he continued. This would not have been possible without the long hours and vision of our most trusted strategists. I didn't flinch. Not when he said vision, not when he said trusted. He was still performing, still playing to the crowd. And then, finally, Miranda Danes stood, the board member, the outlier, the only one who had looked even remotely uneasy during the pre-deal vote last quarter. Mr. Hale, she called out, not waiting for a mic. Can you confirm whether the internal attribution review has cleared compliance for Project LODESTAR? The room paused, like someone had missed their line in a well-rehearsed play. Brandon blinked. Compliance has always worked closely with our team to ensure all standards are met. That wasn't the question, Miranda said. Murmurs erupted. The reporters turned toward her. Then, as if on cue, phones buzzed in near unison. One by one, screens lit up. On mine, Greg's memo appeared. 17 metadata edits confirmed. Author, Celia West. Attribution removed manually between May 2023 and January 2024. Full chain of custody available. Below it, 3 attached screenshots. One from the version history. One from the overwritten author field. One internal email from Brandon to Victor. She's not scalable. Her name complicates things. Whispers swept the room like a cold wind. A reporter near the front raised a hand, then didn't wait for permission. Mr. Hale, are you aware of the breach notice issued this morning? Brandon's eyes narrowed. There's no breach. This is a misunderstanding. Any edits were formatting related. Another reporter cut in. We've just received confirmation that Clause 7.4 has been triggered. The deal is frozen pending legal review. Is that accurate? He looked around like someone had removed the floor beneath him. Before he could answer, Another voice played from a phone speaker. Louder than intended, but too late to stop. An audio recording. Scratchy, but unmistakably his voice. I rewrote her baby to make it palatable. No one wants math with a face they don't recognize. Gasps. Actual gasps. Miranda's eyes didn't leave his face. Victor had appeared at the back of the room now, jaw locked, phone still glowing in his hand. He didn't speak. He didn't defend. He didn't deny. The board sat motionless. The lights no longer felt warm. Brandon opened his mouth, then shut it again. He reached for the mic, but Miranda was already standing. She looked directly at him, voice calm but cold. Your contract will be reviewed. Immediately. I didn't take back the spotlight. I burned the stage and walked away. The door to my new office clicked shut behind me with the soft finality of something earned. Not granted. Not borrowed. Mine. Sunlight streamed across the floorboards, casting long shadows from the scaffold where the metal plaque was being affixed outside. CLAUSEINC. No serif. All caps. Clean steel. The name that once lived buried in footnotes now lived on glass walls. Naomi was already inside, barefoot, holding a bottle of champagne in one hand and balancing 2 glasses in the other. You're late, she teased. I was watching them take down the SynerCore banner, I said. Across the street, SynerCore's massive digital facade cycled through its generic rotating mission statements. Brandon's face, once plastered front and center, was conspicuously absent. Brandon? I asked. Suspended. Officially pending review, but off payroll, Naomi replied. Greg says his network privileges were revoked at 9:01 a.m. sharp. I smiled and sat on the windowsill, still warm from the March sun. Victor? Resigned. They're calling it health-related. Miranda's taking over interim operations. Full board audit underway. I nodded. She always had a better head for strategy than she let on. Naomi popped the cork. It hit the ceiling with a soft thud, rolled, and landed on the floor like a button torn from a jacket. She poured, handed me a glass, and raised hers. To the day they forgot, she said. To the day we remembered, I answered. Greg appeared in the doorway a moment later, laptop under one arm, a small plant in the other. This is mine now, right? He asked, holding up the succulent. You ran the logs that froze $1.69 billion, Naomi said. You can name the conference room if you want. Don't tempt me, he grinned, dropping the plant onto the windowsill beside me. He set his laptop down, pulled up an analytics dashboard. Already 6 inbound investor requests, he said. Guess what they all say? I raised an eyebrow. They trust you more than SynerCore. Naomi sipped her champagne and added, Speaking of trust, our first check cleared this morning. She handed me a folded letter. Heavy cream cardstock, gold ink. At the bottom, in looping script, Miranda Dane lead investor, Clause Inc., no ceremony, no speeches, just capital, belief. My inbox pinged on the tablet beside me. I picked it up. From Forbes editorial subject, feature request. The woman who froze a $1.69 billion deal. We'd love to schedule an interview. You've changed the conversation. I didn't answer. Not yet. Instead, I walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, looked past the city haze toward SynerCore's spire. The same one I used to glance up at during late-night walks, wondering what it would take to be seen. They built a wall to keep me out. I used it to climb higher. I never imagined that a clause buried on page 43 would be the spark that unraveled everything they'd built on my back. For a long time, I thought silence was strategy. That staying composed, staying loyal, would somehow be rewarded. I convinced myself that hard work spoke louder than credit lines and titles. That if I just kept producing, eventually they would have to acknowledge me. Brandon, Victor, the board, everyone. But betrayal doesn't always arrive with a slam. Sometimes it slips in through smiles and silence. Through the we'll fix it later promises. through the erasure of your name from every press release. And when it finally dawns that you've been written out of your own story, what do? You write a new one. Clause 7.4 wasn't revenge. It was truth, time-stamped. It was the one moment I stopped waiting to be invited back in, and instead opened my own door. I didn't shout. I didn't rage. I simply handed over the document they all forgot existed and watched them remember. Watching Brandon freeze on that stage wasn't triumph. It was justice. A delayed, bitter, but necessary reckoning. And when the media came knocking, when Forbes asked to call me the woman who froze a billion-dollar deal, I didn't answer. Not because I didn't care, but because I had already moved on. They can tell whatever story they want. This time, mine doesn't need their approval. From the window of my new office, I can still see the SynerCore tower. It doesn't intimidate me anymore. It just reminds me of the cost of forgetting who you are and the power of remembering. They tried to build a wall to keep me out. I used it to climb higher. Justice rarely arrives on cue. It comes when someone stops asking for permission and starts acting on principle. Celia West didn't shout to be seen. She documented, waited, and chose her moment. In a world where power often hides behind polish and titles, the truth still holds weight. Especially when it's time-stamped, notarized, and undeniable. No wall of lies can stand forever against the tide of truth. Thank you for staying with me through this story. If you've made it this far, chances are you've had your own version of this boardroom moment. Maybe it wasn't a billion-dollar deal. Maybe it wasn't in a glass tower with camera crews and press kits. But maybe it was a project you built, a relationship you invested in, a promotion you earned, a moment that should have had your name on it and didn't. For a long time, I told myself, next time they'll notice. Next time they'll give credit. Next time they'll do the right thing. But next time never came. Because people who benefit from your silence will never volunteer to end it. What I did wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about making headlines or going viral. It was about reclaiming authorship over my own work, my own story, my own worth. If you're sitting at your version of that table, watching someone else take the credit for your effort, please know this. Your value does not disappear just because someone else edits your name out. The receipts you've saved, the drafts, the evidence, the truth, they matter. And when the moment comes, when your own Clause 7.4 moment arrives, you'll know exactly what to do. If this story spoke to you, if you've ever stayed silent just to keep your job, if you've ever been told to wait your turn, if you've ever been the invisible architect behind someone else's applause, leave a comment. Tell your story. Your voice matters here. And if you want more stories about reclaiming credit, rewriting narratives, and choosing truth over performance, hit the like button. Subscribe. Share this with someone who's still waiting for their own moment of clarity. Because the biggest lesson I learned? You don't need to burn the building down. You just need to pull the right lever. And let the weight of truth do the rest. Thank you for listening. And more importantly, thank you for choosing yourself.